Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Before we begin the symposium, we have a couple of housekeeping notes. We have French interpretation available for those who wish to listen in French. Click the interpretation button at the bottom of your screen and select French or Française. Please be aware that we are broadcasting this event live on our Facebook page. We are also recording it and we'll share it on our YouTube channel and website. During the first session, we invite you to share your comments using the chat box. Please keep in mind, this is a public session. Please be courteous and remain on topic. Please only click on links shared by participants you trust. I would now like to invite Dr. Dominique van der Walle, distinguished member of the PEP Board of Directors, to take the floor.
There you go. Hello to everyone joining us from around the globe. Greetings and welcome to our very special guests, partners, and collaborators, including representatives of the International Development Research Center, Co-Impact, Global Affairs Canada, the Hewlett Foundation, and the MasterCard Foundation. Greetings also to fellow members of the PEP Board of Directors who are with us today. Thank you so much for joining us. As a representative of the PEP Board of Directors, it gives me great pleasure to welcome you to this symposium, organized as part of the 2022 PEP Annual Conference. For those of you less familiar with PEP, the Partnership for Economic Policy is a global organization dedicated to driving development in the Global South. We believe that every country needs and deserves to have local expertise to inform decisions about their future and their development. We support teams throughout the Global South as they produce high quality, policy engaged evidence to inform decisions at home. Now, each year we bring together these research teams for training, to share their work, and to learn from one another at our annual conference. And each year we also conclude our conference with a public event to exchange with a broader set of actors on issues related to development policy, debates, and research. Now, 2022 is a particularly special year as we celebrate the 20th anniversary of PEP, 20 years. To mark this occasion, the theme today is the specific role of PEP in increasing the participation of the Global South in these debates. We will begin shortly with an overview of what has been achieved over the past 2 decades, highlighting our success and sharing the lessons that have helped define our current approach. We will hear testimonials from a few alumni and honor the dedicated people who have played vital roles in building this unique organization. The second part of the event will look forward with a discussion on next steps in promoting Southern-driven development. And this will feature a group of distinguished panelists and be moderated by Fred Carden, the chair of the PEP Board of Directors. Now, I would now like to invite Jane Mariara, the Executive Director of PEP, to say a few words. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dominique. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the PEP 2022 Symposium. Thank you for joining us on this special occasion as we celebrate 20 years of PEP. I won't say much now, as I will have the opportunity a little later to share with you what we consider to be the key lessons that we have learned from the 20 years of experience in supporting locally led policy research in developing countries. As is the case every year, today's event is the culmination of 3 weeks of activities for 23 project teams who are currently conducting PEP-supported studies across the Global South. Our conference activities aim to not only review their progress, but also to equip these teams for the next stage of their projects, either in terms of their research work or stakeholder engagement and dissemination activities. Once again, this year's conference was a real success, with active participation of beneficiaries in all workshops, sessions, and very productive discussion around ongoing research projects. In 2019, PEP adopted the co-production model, which means that all project teams, as well as our conference participants, include a mix of researchers and government officers, as well as other types of stakeholders. We have also integrated new tools and practices as part of our project deliverables to improve the information that our teams provide to local decision makers. Meanwhile, despite this strong focus on policy and practical use of evidence, the research continues to be of the highest scientific quality, as indicated by the share of PEP projects that result in high-ranking scientific journal publications. Well, our results suggest that we are on the right track to help increase Southern participation in international development debates. We are still far from equal representation, and so much remains to be done. We hope today's discussions will help guide our strategies and path over the next 20 years and beyond. Therefore, on behalf of PEP, I thank our fathers, led by IDRC, the Hewlett Foundation, Global Affairs Canada, Core Impact, MasterCard Foundation. We have other donors such as UNICEF, UNDP, among others, as well as our collaborators, our partners, our researchers, for their enduring support. We look forward to a very productive future together. I hope you will all enjoy the different features of today's events, and thank you once again for joining us. I would now like to invite another member of our distinguished board of directors, Carol Newman, to take the floor for the first presentation of the day, to review highlights of PEP's work and the impact this has had throughout the world over the past 20 years. Carol, you are welcome. Thank you.
Many thanks, Jane, for the introduction. I will share my screen. Okay, so I hope you're seeing that. So good afternoon, everyone, or good morning, depending on where you are in the world. And thank you for the introduction, Jane, and thank you also for the introduction to PEP for everybody joining us. So I'm really delighted to have this opportunity to talk about PEP and to talk about its global impact with you here today. So PEP's vision, let me just see if this is, yes, PEP's vision is a world in which every country has the local evidence and expertise to help make decisions about its own future. And the mission to that end is to promote Southern-driven development, where policy decisions are informed by high-quality, locally generated evidence. Now, since its creation in 2002, PEP has supported 377 locally led researchers in 65 different developing countries. And all of these projects aimed to generate a contextualized evidence base to inform country relevant development policy decisions. 1/3 of PEP supported research projects are in low income economies and fragile or conflict affected countries. And through these projects, PEP has trained over 1,200 local researchers, 48% of whom are women. And indeed, this ratio has actually increased in recent years, with women now representing around 56% of PEP grantees since 2019. Also in recent years, nearly all PEP-supported project teams have included government-affiliated members. In 2021, government officers represented as much as 44% of all PEP grant recipients and training beneficiaries. So with its headquarters in Kenya, and over 80% of its current affiliates based in developing countries, and that includes staff, managers, mentors, scientific and policy advisors, PEP has become a truly Southern-led global organization. Over the past 2 decades, PEP has developed a unique program to support the work of local researchers in developing countries, while at the same time strengthening and promoting their capacity and disseminating their findings worldwide. The PEP Research Support Program guarantees not only the scientific quality of the resulting evidence, but also its relevance for informing ongoing development policy debates and decisions in the host country. So PEP follows a comprehensive learning by doing approach, and so contributes to strengthening technical capacities while facilitating engagement and collaborative working between researchers and policy stakeholders at the national level. So this unique approach has proven successful. PEP monitors project teams supported by PEP very closely, and using these data, we know that over the past decade, the vast majority of the projects were featured or reported in national news media, thus contributing to informing general public debates and perceptions. And more importantly, over half of these projects have improved or supported evidence-informed policymaking in the target countries. So in 2021 alone, there were 34 reports of PEP projects or findings in national news media, and 13 projects across 11 countries had some influence on policymaking decisions or practices. So when we talk about influencing policymaking, what do we mean? Well, we mean the direct use or assimilation of the evidence produced through PEP research. So PEP findings being taken up to inform policy decisions or advisory processes. We also mean the assignment of PEP local researchers to special policy advisory groups or government task forces. So local PEP researchers being called upon to advise policy design and national strategies. And we also mean the influence of the PEP project model on institutional practices. So when institutions decide to adopt features of PEP projects to improve their own practices related to evidence-informed policymaking. So for example, to increase research policy collaboration or to better translate scientific advice for policy use. But the impact doesn't end there. Participating in a PEP project can also have a tremendous impact on the career of a local researcher. So beyond the knowledge gained and skills developed, when researchers engage with national and government stakeholders, they benefit from strategic exposure. So these key audiences are made aware of their expertise and are likely to seek and use it again. So PEP's monitoring and evaluation data over the past decade also shows that by the time their PEP project was concluded, at least half the project team members experienced significant career advancement. And in half of these cases, the promotion also contributed to increasing their influence or involvement in policy processes. Finally, in line with its objective to increase the voice of Southern experts in international debates around development and economic policy, PEP also provides researchers with technical guidance to adapt their research paper for submission to top international scientific journals, as well as funding to support their participation when invited to present their PEP research at high-level international academic conferences. So in fact, over a third of papers from PEP-supported projects are published in a highly regarded international scientific journal, and half of all PEP project teams are invited to present in international academic conferences. So this is quite remarkable and is certainly evidence that PEP has succeeded in this aspect of its mission as well, so improving the representation of Southern researchers in the field. So to find out more about the impact of specific PEP projects throughout the world, you can visit our website at the address shown on the screen. And we will now hear testimonials from current or former PEP grantees who are going to share a few words on their experience and views of the PEP support program. So thank you very much for your attention, and I will now stop sharing. So thank you.
I am told there is no sound. Is that correct?
Yes, we cannot hear.
Just a moment. Jenny, what is the function to get the sound? It was working earlier. Okay. Okay. Okay.
Inquiry and scientific knowledge. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. I'm honored to speak at this celebration of 20 years of PEP. For me, PEP has indeed been a shared and inclusive partnership of informed inquiry and scientific knowledge. The PEP program is very unique for someone like me who belongs to the academia, yet has been able to equally contribute to the policy sector. And this was only possible through the PEP program. It is a program that encourages plenty of learning of economic models and state-of-the-art economic tools and software via an organized team of professionals, policy experts, mentors, and support staff. It is by far one of the only programs that encourages the local researchers to engage in effective dialogue along the full duration of the project. And this is done with the home country's policymakers, community leaders, and all the relevant stakeholders. It is indeed a program that highlights the importance of assessing local needs and effectively coming up with policy solutions that touch the lives of many at the lowest of the grassroots levels. As governments and policymakers throughout the world were grappling hard to understand COVID-19, PEP had already embarked on guiding us on the possible immediate steps with respect to the fiscal and poverty implications of the pandemic. And as per the policymakers in Pakistan, PEP projects have been instrumental in providing rapid forecast of how to reduce how the reduced economic activities during lockdown were impacted directly and indirectly. Definitely, PEP has also influenced the way I conduct research. It has allowed me to introduce policy modeling in my career at different levels, and it has given me insights into path-breaking modeling techniques and opened doors to the global PEP community, which is all doing amazing research and multidimensional policy analysis. I am now able to conduct effective interdisciplinary research on cross-cutting themes that target multiple SDGs at the same time. We not only have become more scientifically aware about our work, but moreover, we are also beginning to see things under the gender lens. Indeed, this was an area unexplored from my research domain earlier. I have been very lucky to be engaged with PEP since 2008. And since then, I believe the development mechanisms, the monitoring, the evaluation and control mechanisms, along with the effective documentation of these efforts, all have played a vital role in this regard.
The PEP support program for locally led research is designed to engage teams from both the supply and demand side of an impact evaluation. And to me, there are two particular things that are very unique about that program. First, on the supply side, local researchers are not only getting a grant to conduct an impact evaluation, but they also enjoy a full package of training and a mentoring in impact evaluation. Here, really, mentors are not like traditional reviewers, but they contribute to challenge, to guide, and to support the research teams throughout the life cycle of an impact evaluation. That's the first thing. The second unique thing is that from the demand side, government officers also enjoy customized trainings on several topics, RCTs, how to use evidence to inform policy making, how to do policy engagement, and even communication. There is no doubt that the PEP support program for locally led research is contributing to the Southern driving development. My experience with has in my career and also the way I do my research today. I'm getting more and more confident on how to design and conduct complex experimental impact evaluation. I'm also more confident now to mentor junior and early career researchers.
PEP gives advantage to female researchers. This is an aspect that is mostly neglected by most research organizations. PEP is very strict on the gender balance. And I would say PEP ensures co-production between researchers and policy makers and all relevant stakeholders. This is actually very important because it makes the outcome of the research more robust and more impactful. I have participated in 3 PEP supported projects between 2017 and to date. I've taken some trainings on several courses. Particularly, I can say that I've gained much knowledge in gender issue analysis, and this has accorded me much recognition amongst my peers. I also like to say that PEP project has impacted my way of doing research. Like before this time, I would only do research, mostly do research for publication. But now, before carrying out a research project, I like to think of the end users. I like to think about how my research is going to influence policy decisions. And I think these are very important steps in the life of an early researcher. And I would like to state also that from my view and in my opinion that PEP is effectively contributing to Southern driven development. I personally had opportunity to meet with some of Southern researchers via PEP projects. And my work has been influenced by the quality of some of this PEP-supported research done by researchers in developing countries. And I can confidently say that through these activities, PEP is contributing to capacity building, in research and policy development in developing countries.
My experience with PEP has been transforming and life-changing. PEP gave my team and I the opportunity to ask relevant questions for the context of Peru and implement our research design in the field. PEP gave us the opportunity to lead a research project that tries to answer a critical question, a critical challenge for the Peruvian context. How to financially include the Peruvian poor. But my experience with PEP has not only been transforming from the professional point of view. As a result of my experience with PEP, I have also grown as a person and as a human being. PEP gave me the opportunity to work with a diverse group of researchers from all around the world. I have had the opportunity to work with 2 teams in Africa, in Guinea-Bissau and in Malawi, and to observe firsthand the capacity that these teams have to ask relevant questions and to implement research in the field and to lead research in the field, as well as the commitment that they have towards the development of their own communities. PEP gives these individuals the possibility to lead their own research projects. This is not only relevant from the point of view of making the academic debate more diverse. This is critical for economic development. Enhancing the capacities of local-based research teams by giving them the opportunity to lead their own research projects is also critical for economic development. And I congratulate PEP on the efforts that PEP performs for this. I just want to finish by saying that as a result of my experience with PEP, I have acquired important skills that allow me to implement better research in the field and to ask relevant questions. Thank you so much and have a good day.
Thank you. Thank you, PEP former and current PEP researchers for those very wonderful testimonials. Picking from where they have left, I will go to the next session, which is just to share some of the lessons that we have picked along the way in PEP. And as I share my slides, I would say that I would start behind them and say that I've also grown through PEP. I was a PEP researcher than themselves, but indeed, the crowd has changed so much over the years. So we've just moved from one level of capacity building to another. So allow me to share my screen and then we can pick it up from there. Okay, thank you. So I want to continue from where we've heard from our former researchers, but also as Carol indicated during her presentation, and you remember she had this slide, the PEP support program has actually become very highly sophisticated, not only to support the work of Southern researchers with funding, tools and resources, but also to facilitate engagement and collaborative working between researchers and policy makers. And that's actually what we have heard from the speakers who have just given us their testimonial. But also, most importantly, we have moved to strengthening the capacities of grant recipients in producing evidence that meets both high standards of scientific quality and also the real practical needs of policy making at the country level. Yeah, I need to move my slide, sorry. Okay, so then what approach have we used over the time or over the period? Basically, the sophistication of the PEP model has not been developed overnight. We've ran a continuum over the last 20 years, and many lessons have been learned over the decade. You can see the type of the movement that we've had over the period, and these experiences have culminated in supporting locally led research across the Global South, as we have heard from the testimonials. And each of the lessons has been used to inform. Sorry, I think I have an issue clicking. Okay, each of the lessons has been used to inform the next programmatic decision to inform the quality or to improve the quality. Sorry. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, so what I was saying is that this model has developed over time, as we can see here, moving from maybe the raw static base in 2002 to where we were at 2012, about 147 projects, 50 countries, and where we are now, 2022, and 374 projects, 65 countries. And basically the point I'm making is that the sophistication of our methodology has grown over time. It has been developed over time. And what we have done is to use the lessons that we have at each point to inform the next stage of development, moving from the continuum where we've moved from 2002 to 2022. And most of the innovations that we have brought on board are actually the ones that have been targeted at enhancing the scientific quality of the research, but also the policy relevance of the work, integrating, of course, the evidence generated through the PEP research. But also important is our aim to enhance the feasibility of PEP research findings or expertise at both the national and international levels, and also ensuring that we are increasing access to critical resources, especially the tools that researchers in the developing South do not have. And finally, we ensure that we do have the co-production, the policy papers, and so forth. Basically, what we are saying is that to improve the quality of our research, our policy engagement, our output, we've had to develop over the period. Now, I'm going to go over some of the lessons and related innovations that we have introduced over the period, and just picking on the ones that we consider as most important to our success. And also, we would encourage other stakeholders, especially the ones who are doing this kind of work that we do, to consider to complement their own approach to development research. So looking at the lessons, the first lesson that I want us to look at is the locally driven research, as was alluded to by Carol. And at the core of our mission is the will to increase the participation and influence of local voices in development policy. And the very conception of PEP then stems from the conviction that researchers and stakeholders living and working in developing countries should play an important role in defining economic development research agendas, and that methods should be selected as a function of the issue to be studied rather than the reverse. One of our researchers who gave testimonials made very clear of the need for demand-driven rather than supply-driven research. And one of the things that we do at PEP is to ensure that we are insisting on locally-driven research, because it's the researchers and the policymakers who know the needs that are on the ground. And therefore, a critical feature of our work and our objective is to provide an opportunity for local researchers to determine the questions, the issues that should be object of their research based on their personal knowledge and understanding of the priorities on the ground. But of course, at the same time, we have different initiatives funded by donors that provide broad thematic orientations for the research projects to be supported as part of these initiatives. But either way, in all cases, we end up looking up to the local research teams to define, in consultation with relevant stakeholders, the specific research and policy questions to be analyzed. And then once they do that, we provide support to define the best methodological approach to be applied to conduct that analysis. Still on lessons, another key lesson that we have learned over the time is the importance of access to resources. What we know is that to make sure that voices of Southern experts are truly heard and their expertise given full credibility, then adjustments need to be made to level the playing field with the Northern counterparts in terms of research resources. Although I would say really it's attempting, it's not that we can really level the ground. And in addition to making up for the lack of funding sources and opportunities at the national level, as well as for the lack of international funding opportunities for the Southern experts, PEP has learned the importance of providing non-financial resources, such as access to scientific literature, data, and research tools in order to successfully promote Southern-driven development. And of course, Southern experts also lack the same access as their Northern counterparts to opportunities to capacity development, that is to run advanced economic techniques of analysis throughout their careers, whether this would be through formal graduate education, advanced training workshops, or seminar series. And significant investments in capacity development is therefore a key component in promoting Southern-driven development. And these are some of the gaps then that we try to address as PEP. Another key reason that we can talk about or just highlight is mentorship and network. Again, since 2002, what we have learned as PEP is that successful capacity development requires not only classic training workshops, but also intensive mentoring that is running by doing through the application of learned techniques to the analysis of real-world policy issues. There's no trade-off between capacity development and research quality in promoting Southern-driven development. They must go hand in hand. They are mutually reinforcing. Also, capacity must be developed in producing the highest quality, rigorous research. High quality research actually requires strong capacity development and intensive mentoring, and this is something we invest in very heavily. And then finally here I can note that since PEP's creation, a decentralized distant support model was adopted actually for the last 20 years to be able to reach out to researchers in a large number of southern countries, including, of course, conflict vulnerable states in an efficient and cost-effective manner, while drawing on resource persons from around the world. Of course, we know how difficult it has been, especially pre-COVID, for connection, internet connectivity in some of the remote countries, but this is something we have innovated over time and therefore did not catch us by surprise when we had to go into it full throttle when COVID actually came. But now with the COVID crisis, what we have done is to develop or to strengthen our virtual mode of mentorship, virtual meetings, mentorship, training workshops, which we actually plan to continue even after COVID, and to ensure that outreach to all teams. Okay, sorry, we want to emphasize this even in the future, taking into account three considerations. First, the fact that we need to increase our outreach. When we used to have physical meetings, we would hardly get enough of our researchers to the meetings because of the cost. But now, when we have virtual meetings, we are able to bring all members of the teams together. Then we would also be able to address the global climate crisis through virtual meetings because of carbon savings and of course the cost savings that would accompany virtual meetings. So basically what we are saying is that it's not that we are going to stop having physical meetings post-COVID, but we will try to strike a balance between physical and virtual meetings, especially for global climate change concerns. The next reason is the stakeholder engagement. While PEP has always engaged researchers or encouraged researchers to engage and share findings with in-country stakeholders, even from the past, even when I myself was a researcher, we have innovated on this as PEP, and a more systematized approach was put in place in 2012 to ensure that research teams would engage from the earliest stage of their projects so that the stakeholders' views contribute to inform the objectives, and also to periodically consult the stakeholders all the way through to the end of the project. Our experience over the decade suggests that early engagement of stakeholders, of course, starting from identification of the policy issue, the policy problem to be analyzed, the design of the appropriate framework of analysis, some of the key and most critical features of our mechanism, and this contributes greatly to success of our work and to research uptake and policy influence. However, to be effective, engagement requires a systematic and a very strategic approach, both in the sense of selecting the most relevant stakeholders to engage with, but also often to determine the best way to reach out and communicate with the stakeholders. So it soon became clear for us as PEP that beyond the overall generic guidance and training provided by our communication staff, such strategies must be adapted to each specific context, and therefore guidance must be provided from a perspective that understands the country-specific and institutional contexts. What we did with this lesson was to actually realize that we needed the creation of what we call the Policy Outreach Mentorship Program. And since 2016, all PEP-supported project teams are paired with experienced policy advisors who are based in the same country or in the region to help in the design and implement effective policy engagement strategies. Okay, sorry. The next lesson is on knowledge transition. So we produce our research, we ensure that it's policy engaged, we ensure that it has, it's reaching out to the relevant stakeholders. The next stage is the knowledge transition. So linked to, and as a result of our experience with stakeholder engagement, as I've described in the previous slide, we've also drawn a series of important lessons on what is required for research findings to be considered as useful tools or as useful inputs for policy making. And a lot of that has to do with the way that knowledge is shared and the way that knowledge is communicated between researchers and policymakers. Of course, the mutual understanding is critical from the very onset of a project and at the design stage, so that the research objective and questions are aligned with actual policy problems and needs, and thus of direct use for decision makers. At the same time, cross interaction between researchers, policymakers also helps increase awareness, especially among stakeholders, of the possibilities and constraints of research, while generating a sense of ownership and anticipation of the findings. And in parallel, PEP now requires scientific mentors and policy mentors to work together for each project, so as to meet and discuss the alignment of the research and policy objectives, and so as to provide consistent advice to research teams. Moreover, we also come to realize that the same alignment and contextualization efforts are required when communicating the results of research. The purpose of the research paper is not to produce a policy recommendation as we normally do. We would write scientific papers, and in the end we say we have a section on policy recommendations. Research actually generates information on a single piece of the information, a single piece of the puzzle, that is policy making. But for policymakers to understand the value and relevance of this information, it has to be presented in a way that shows how it fits their puzzle. And that is why PEP now requires that all project teams must produce in parallel to their research outputs a policy paper analysis, which aims to position the evidence in the relevant policy context and decision-making framework. And this has resulted in a significant improvement of our policy briefs as decision-making support tools. Okay, the final lesson that we have is on monitoring. Okay, not the final, it's just one of the, maybe where we would choose to stop today and share others online. So finally, it will not be possible for an institution like PEP with a very small staff of only maybe less than 15 permanent members of staff and working in sometimes more than 50 countries or 50 country teams simultaneously every year to implement such a complex approach on a daily basis without a highly sophisticated monitoring and evaluation system. So in addition to the close and tailored monitoring of individual projects by the assigned scientific and policy output mentors, all project teams are required to submit periodic reports of their progress, both in terms of research and non-research activities. That is, for instance, stakeholder engagement. And these reports are evaluated by relevant PEP experts, mentors, and staff, and must be approved by PEP before we can release the next installment of a research grant in any cycle. This helps to ensure that the projects are on track to achieve their objectives and also they are of high quality outputs. And this also enables us to act quickly in case a project gets sidetracked or runs behind the time schedule. But of course, to be efficient, the monitoring process and tools must also be standardized and automated. Otherwise, it will not be easy. So as to easily compare performance between projects. Over the years, we at PEP have designed a varied set of tools and practices to achieve efficiency in program management. And one of them is a web-based survey tool comprising several questionnaire forms that collect detailed information on the various dimensions and potential outcomes of a PEP project, from capacity building to policy influence. While the bulk of our M&D practice and tools remain constant across initiative to ensure comparability and efficiency in performance evaluation, the system is also designed to be adaptable to different project types and objectives. So depending on the project, we will adapt the seemingly static approach. And one of the most important contributions of this monitoring process is the production of concrete evidence. I can't stop this without saying this: concrete evidence of the impacts of the substantial investments of PEP and its funders in developing research capacity, conducting rigorous research, and providing insights into critical real-world policy issues. This evidence is a mix of quantitative and anecdotal and belies common belief that it is impossible and to measure and show demonstrable impact from policy, research, and capacity building. So as I finish, these are the main lessons that we have drawn from our experience in supporting locally led policy research, and which have contributed to defining and refining our approach over the past 20 years. To find out more about this approach and how it works, you can visit our website at this address. And now to conclude this first part of this symposium, we want to present a short video in which we emphasize the vital roles of former members whose contributions, dedication were critical in establishing the organization that PEP is today, and of course the development over time. This will be the first of a series of features that will be presented via PEP News over the next few months to honor these outstanding contributors. We hope you enjoy this first item. Of course, I should mention that it's not possible to recognize all of you. I know there are many of you watching now, and you may not see yourself mentioned, but know that we recognize the contribution of everyone. Thank you. Over to Marjorie.
To acknowledge the success story that is PEP is to also acknowledge the special contributions of a small group of people who may no longer play an active role in the organization, but whose vision, commitment, and unwavering dedication made it all possible. PEP began with this small group of world-renowned economists who shared a vision and decided to dedicate their valuable time, efforts, and expertise to achieve it. They were the original architects of PEP. Their intent and purposes remain at the heart of PEP's vision and mission today. The fact that PEP was initially created as a global network, connecting institutions and individual researchers worldwide without a formal institutional base, and that it remained so for over 10 years, testifies to their determination to work together, joining efforts and forces around a common goal. Among them are those who established the PEP research groups, each focused on a specific methodology for economic policy research. As the first directors of these groups for several years, each provided scientific leadership while also participating actively as mentors to local research teams, and most continue to do so to this day. And of course, PEP's first executive director. After more than 10 years leading PEP, he continues to support us as the organization's scientific advisor, making him the longest serving member of PEP. PEP's first board of directors was created in 2013 when PEP was incorporated as an international nonprofit organization. Its first members thus played a vital role in establishing the structures and institutional capacity that set PEP on its current path. Other contributors have also left their mark over the years as they managed PEP research support activities worldwide, whether as directors of research groups or representatives of regional partner organizations. We also want to recognize the important contributions of those who are still active in PEP, including current leaders and directors of our research groups and long-serving staff members. Finally, PEP would not be here, nor be the organization it is today, without the continuous support, advice, and guidance of our first funder. IDRC was instrumental in founding PEP and has been with us ever since. To all of those who have dedicated their time, energy, resources, efforts, and wisdom to building PEP over the years, we want to say thank you. If PEP has been able to make a difference in the world over the years, it is entirely thanks to you. Hello, everyone. Welcome back. It is 5 minutes after the hour, and we will now resume our program with a panel discussion on next steps in promoting Southern-driven development. A quick reminder that we have French interpretation available. For those who wish to listen in French, click the interpretation button at the bottom of your screen and select French or Française. During the session, we invite you to ask our panelists questions at any time. The panelists will answer these questions after the main discussion. Please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen to submit your questions to the panelists. To share your comments with all participants, you are welcome to use the chat box. Keep in mind that this is a public discussion, so please be courteous and remain on topic. Please only click on links shared by participants you trust. I now hand over to Dr. Fred Carden, Chair of the PEP Board of Directors, who is our moderator for the panel discussion.
Thank you very much, Chantal. Appreciate that. What a wonderful survey of what PEP has accomplished to date, and also some of the behind the scenes of how PEP actually got to where it is today and where we see it continuing for many years to come. So as Chantal said, this session is really about the future and what comes next and what can PEP be actually doing going forward. But just to set the context before I introduce the panel, there's a group of PEP researchers who recently published a paper in Economic Letters where they asked the question, what's the representation of researchers in the Global South in development research? And while you've heard a lot about accomplishments that have really been fantastic accomplishments, this paper really shows that much remains to be done. They looked, for example, at conferences and found that all of the leading development economic conferences are taking place in the Global North, with the exception of the African Development Bank's conference. And when they looked at who participated in those conferences, on average, 9% of the participants were from universities in the Global South and 57% from researchers in the Global Northern universities. And when they looked at journals, they found about what they identified as the leading economic journals, they found 16% of the articles by researchers in the Global South. So lots remains to be done, and that's really what we wanted to focus on here today through a series of questions. But before I do that, I wanted to introduce the panel and ask them all to turn their videos on. And the first one I'll introduce, you've already heard his name, Mustafa Nabli, founding chair of the board of PEP, and a lifetime of work in economic policy in Tunisia as well. Second, we have Ariane Dahan from the International Development Research Center. Ariane has been a promoter, cheerleader, friendly critic, and very good friend of PEP for many years at IDRC and is much appreciated. Next, we have Chris Chibwana, who has recently joined as the representative to PEP at the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation. Great to have you on board as well, and look forward to your comments. And finally, and in some ways most importantly, because she lives the challenges of getting research out there in the Global South, is Ana Kassouf, who's a professor at the University of Sao Paulo in Brazil. Ana started as a PEP fellow with PEP, as a PEP grant recipient, became a fellow, and is now a representative of the fellows to the PEP corporate membership group, which is really the highest governing body of PEP. So welcome to you as well. We have 3 questions that we're going to address, and I'll focus the first part of the discussion on the people who might be the most directly thinking about those questions, but also invite the other panelists to contribute. So I'll ask that people keep their interventions relatively short, because we have 3 questions and 4 people, and we do want to leave time to respond to some of the questions that people put forward. So the 3 questions that we have talked about a little bit are: what are the obstacles to Southern-driven development, and what are some potential innovative solutions? And this is a more broad question, and the next 2 questions will get down to what can actually be done, and what can funders do, and then what can PEP itself actually be doing to promote more and more engagement and participation and profile to researchers in the Global South. So I'm going to start with the first question, and I think I'll start with Ana Kassouf, and then go to Mustafa. So if you could, Ana, begin with giving us some reflections on the challenges that you face, please.
Thank you, Fred. Thank you, PEP, for inviting me to participate to this very important debate. I think we can divide the obstacles that Southern researchers face in 2 sides: the supply side and the demand side. The supply side, I mean all the obstacles that reduce the quality of research. What would be that? Networking. It's very difficult for us to visit other countries sometimes, or to study abroad. Funding that would allow us to go to conferences, to have some contact with the mainstream of knowledge. Many technologies that are available in developed countries that is very difficult for us. Lack of human capital sometimes, lack of infrastructures. So all of this language is a very important barriers. English language is very important. So all these factors reduce the quality of research in developing countries. On the other hand, we have this demand side. The demand side, I would say, is that referees and journal editors sometimes underestimate the value of local knowledge. And we have in this research you mentioned, we saw that there are many desk rejections from Southern researchers when they submit a paper. One of them is because of plagiarism, and it's known that the language is very important, that sometimes the person doesn't know how to rephrase and then go to have these problems. Also because of local research that they think is not very important. So this is another very interesting point that we should focus, and many people don't even remember or don't give attention. There is a very new research paper came out with my colleague, done by my colleague, she showed that in top development journals, looking at the website, she found 439 editors, only 17% were from southern countries. And so these journals are studying our problems, the developing country problems, and most of them that participate are from northern countries that sometimes don't have knowledge that are very important to solve problems and influence policy. Let me stop here, otherwise other people don't have time. Thank you so much, Fred.
Thank you. Mustafa, you have a lifetime of experience in this area. What are your reflections?
Thank you, Fred, and thanks to PEP for organizing this event. And let me start by congratulating PEP for this 20-year event, 20 years of a great job done to develop Southern-driven development. Fred, I think I'm not going to answer your questions.
No surprise.
I am going to answer it indirectly because I'm going to dream. I'm going to dream with you because my age allows me to do that.
Excellent.
I think I'd like to make in this view about promoting Southern-driven development, looking forward over the next 20 years, 30 years, 40 years. I think I'd like to make two points or two messages. One, the first is that we need to be moving from catch-up to frontier research. Over the last 30 years or more, support to capacity building and research in Southern countries, it has been mostly oriented towards allowing researchers in these countries to catch up to best practices and to best research methods available worldwide. This has led to focus on existing research methodologies and approaches to policy issues and on mastering these techniques and methodologies. I think this has been the main thrust of what has been done in this area. Now, as we look forward in the future, I think the next stage of Southern-driven development is to go towards the frontier of research. It's not playing catch-up anymore. I think we need the next 20 years or 30 years to see Southern researchers playing at the frontier of research. And why do I say that? I say that because I think there has been a few trends globally which impose this, which push us towards that. It's not a choice. I think it's a necessity. I think I would like to mention three major trends. The first trend has been the increasing and greater questioning of economics and the effectiveness of its approaches. So just looking at standard old methodologies does not do it anymore. This trend has started with the Great Recession, 2008, 2009. It has been strengthened, gained strength with the COVID-19 pandemic. And economics has been too much associated with neoliberal economics and has been increasingly questioned. Economists in southern countries need to face to that challenge. The second trend, I think, globally that has been taking place is that there has been two major global subjects that have taken center stage, which are inequality in general within country as well as globally, but within quantity of country, as well as the global climate crisis. And these two areas, they have turned out to be really very difficult to deal with within the standard economics approaches. Economics has not been of much use, of help in dealing with the climate crisis, and has not been of much use in dealing with increased inequality. This means that a new political equilibria and questioning of social contracts are really increasingly the major game in town in the political domain. The third trend that we have been observing recently, and it's less known, is the trend towards merging of development economics and economics, just economics. I think the economics that we used to think is appropriate for advanced countries. And we thought that there is a different economics, which is development economics, which is appropriate for developing countries. I think that distinction is almost gone in my mind. I think the insights that we gain from development economics today are very much in use or helpful for advanced countries in many areas, and vice versa. So there is an increasing convergence of economics to deal with the global issues, whether it is in advanced or developing countries, because of the many issues of imperfection and so on that deal with those issues. So this means that really, as we look forward in the next 20 years or 30 years, researchers in developing countries need to move to face to these issues and to be players in dealing with these issues as we go forward. Now, the second point is, what are the issues, the main issues looking forward? What are the main topics that we should be facing and looking for? I think to be very quick, I mentioned three. At the broadest level, I think the major problem that we're facing in developing countries as we go forward is really indeed the need for citizens of developing countries to increase their standards of living is something that we take for granted. Developing countries have, need to increase standards of living, and therefore they need to claim more resources, energy, food, and other resources. But at the same time, as we are trying to do this, we know that the constraints on the ability of Mother Earth to provide these resources is under a lot of stress. So how can we think of development economics in this context, in this constraint, the new world of constraints on resources? I think we tend to ignore this in development economics today. It's like climate change is an issue for advanced countries, but it's not. It's an issue for us as well. Sorry. I may be getting COVID-19, so don't worry. The second topic, which is linked to what I said earlier, which is it is increasingly recognized that market economics, which has been associated with neoliberal economics, cannot do the job anymore. We cannot depend on market economics and liberal economics to deal with the issues of the world today. As mentioned, because of climate change, inequality, technological change, and so on. So we need solutions which combine market, state, and civil and society in general, civil society in general, combinations of solutions. And this requires a lot of new kind of research and kind of work that needs to take place. And developing countries has an advantage taking this track and following this track going forward. Finally, the last issue that I think is really of highest importance is technology. As we look forward in the next few decades, technology is going to be driving a lot of happening. Technology now, it is information, digital technology is spreading now, but biotechnology is coming up very soon, and it will be paying a lot of. So lots of new issues are coming up. And how can we harness technology for the benefit of mankind? It's not so clear cut. So that we respect humanity, our rights, our privacies, our freedoms, how we ensure equitable societies, and how allow everyone to have a meaningful life of work and leisure. These issues are going to be central to our future. And I think developing countries researchers need to be working on those issues forward. It is not enough anymore. My last word is not anymore enough to fiddle around with a small, technical model. The issues that we face now are much bigger, are much more challenging. And I think researchers in southern countries need to move forward and take the stage. Thank you. I'll stop here.
Thank you, Mustafa. I think you've touched on the whole set of questions that we have and presented some really interesting challenges. And I'd like to turn to the funders at this point, because you've heard some very concrete issues. You've heard some very big challenges that are proposed for researchers in the Global South. And I wonder, Chris, if you would start us off with some reflections on what you've heard, but what also you think the role of donors can be in actually moving forward. And then I'll go to Ariane.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Fred. And I'll say my internet is very unstable, so if I freeze,
okay,
you can move to the next panelist. But yeah, really, I think I agree with the sentiments that have been shared in terms of what the obstacles are to Southern-driven development. I do think like we should face it. Power asymmetries are a big issue. The people that have money are not often from the Global South. It's Northern governments, Northern foundations, Northern multilaterals. They're the ones that are defining the rules for development and defining what questions get asked, setting the agenda, determining who conducts those investigations. And it's sad that governments in the Global South don't always invest in research, and in part because they don't have the resources to do so, or because they've not seen the returns to funding research.
Okay, I think Chris is frozen. So Ariane, let me turn to you and see if we get him back soon.
Thanks. Can you hear me, Fred?
Yes. Yeah.
Thanks. Thanks so much. Really, I hope Chris will come back, because I am really keen to hear his take on the power asymmetries. First of all, thanks very much for inviting me, and thanks for a great. Chris, do you want to continue?
Sure. Very quickly. Yeah. So I think what we see. I don't know where you stopped hearing me, but really, we see inequities in opportunities and funding, and this really remains a critical issue that's putting researchers and institutions in the Global South at the mercy of high-income country funders, high-income countries contractors, and high-income country principal investigators. And so one of the reasons for the difficulty in shifting this inequity is the level at which the decision-making process is open to researchers and other collaborators from low and middle-income countries. The current systems that we have, they continue to regard low LMIC collaborators basically as passive recipients or as data collectors with very little representation and voice at that decision-making level. And so by the time that LMIC partners are brought into decision-making, the priority areas for research are already determined, the funds are already divided, the research questions have already been developed, and the strategy has already been set. And so that really makes it very difficult for researchers from the Global South to take an active role and shape the agenda around research and investigation. Now, I think funders like the Hewlett Foundation, where I work, have a role to try and change this. I think what I often hear is that within the funder ecosystem is that there's weak capacity, both research and organizational, within the Global South. Now, we all know that that's not true at all, because we have an abundance of research capacity. I think we've heard from the presentations today that there's a plethora of research capacity. I think part of the challenge is that we sometimes struggle to tell our stories much better, or perhaps we're too humble to tell our stories, because culturally we're not accustomed to speaking about ourselves. And so I think for an organization like PEP, and I know that they're doing great work in communicating the work that PEP affiliates and others are doing, amplifying the voices of local researchers. I know PEP does this already, but there's always potential to do more of that. And I think the objective is to highlight the excellent work that Southern researchers are doing and how relevant and impactful that work is. I think we saw from the presentation earlier that 54% of research that was conducted informed decisions. That's impact. I think we need to be able to amplify those stories and to tell those stories a little bit more, a little bit better. And I guess I'll find out, just as a funder and someone who's also from the global South, I'd like to see researchers really bring their authenticity, their experiences, their background, their proximity to the work, and the variety of influences that inform their ideas into the spaces in which they engage. So basically turning into strengths, things that have traditionally been used to make us feel like imposters. For instance, being a person of color, being a local, being locally trained, or not having English as a first language. Those are strengths. And so we need to bring those out and celebrate those in engaging with funders, because sitting as a funder, that's really attractive, because I see those not as weaknesses, but actually as opportunities. And then I think finally, just like we need to refocus our attention to the local needs, the local priorities, the local communities, and the local decision makers, so that we're more responsive to those than we are to external requests for proposals in our choice of focus. I think PEP and its affiliates need to speak out more against parachute research, really, and demand greater control of funding, as well as greater control of research output and the publication, so that local researchers actually are the first authors on articles, not the last author on those articles. So I'll stop there for now.
Thanks, Chris. So Ariane, I'll go to you, and I'd really like to hear you talk a bit about the role that the funders can play. I mean, my own experience, and I think Hewlett's a little bit of an exception in this, is that they tend to be very risk averse. And that causes a lot of pullback and focus on the people you already know. So how can funders actually begin to get past that and really begin to do some of the things Chris raised about actually starting from the agenda that Southern researchers have?
Thanks very much, Fred. I'm with Mustafa. I'm not going to say I'm not going to answer that question, but it's like I can't answer that question fully, and I'm sure you appreciate that. First, thanks for my fellow panelists for that, Chris. You know, your emphasis on power symmetries, and I've never heard the word authenticity in a forum like that. So thank you for bringing that up, and I think we should really build on that. I also want to, you know. I came here, and I listened to the testimonies and so on. Like, yeah, I'm just here to congratulate PEP. The work you've done is fantastic. And if we come to the question, what PEP should do, keep doing what you're doing. This is absolutely fantastic. I always think about this as like, I think it's an Alice in Wonderland. It's like you have to run faster to stand still. The global knowledge network is not standing still, and my feeling is that Southern researchers are always catching up with that. And if you look at the trends that the research by Anna and others have shown, is that's exactly what it shows, right? It's like enormously hard work, and there is no change in the proportion of Southern researchers' representation in the global debates, right? And the reason that it's stagnant is because of your hard work, and I just want to congratulate you on that. It's not enough, but it's not because of the work that you do to keep up with that. Is a fantastic achievement. I think of let me put it in separated into two questions, Fred. In two parts of my answer, rather. The first thing, I think it's important to think about when the question that you put up first, for me, is that's too big a question, if you like, because the question of the position of research is like the development question more broadly, right? And I think it's when I think about development successes, and I know there's not one story to tell about this. It's like if you think about the successes of past development of, say, Nordic developing countries, right? There was a strategy of bringing research or evidence into those successes, and particularly ways of investment, right? If you think about Finland, that is a fairly recent development success, as in 150 years ago is what I call recent. It's like, you know, research, evidence, knowledge, investing in capacities was absolutely essential to that. Even the US, there's a case to that. It is an elite type of investment, but as a conscious investment in elite universities that produce those results, right? And it's integral to the development model, if you like. And China, of course, has done exactly the same, right? It has a nation building over the last 30, 40 years, a nation building emphasis, and evidence is absolutely key to that. So the reason I'm saying this is I don't think you can separate the question about the positioning of research without the development research, the development models more. I think that's important for where I see donors coming in. The resources for development research are finite. We're always worried that they become more finite, and certainly that donors can dedicate to locally generated research always seem to shrink, and they don't really shrink. But again, that's because of the hard work of people advocating for this, right? And I think we just quite simply need to continue to do that. And having worked in different development agencies, that is what we do, right? We constantly, you know, I won't say we push against the power asymmetries, but we push against the quick fix that say ministers in development agencies are looking for, right? And you know, I worked in Claire Short's department, and you know, when Claire Short looked for good research, you know, I fully supported her, and she needed that good research because what? Because she needed to justify the investment in development more generally, which in Europe, in the UK, wherever is constantly under pressure, right? So I'm fully aware of the pressure that people face and how that then leads to certain investment. I'm not justifying it, but as a political driver behind it. The crux to the next steps, if you like, is very much continuing that advocacy. We need to continue the work that we're doing, but at the same time, think about the broader context of development successes, and that is always around nations, countries, local groups, and so on, taking charge of that development, right? And that is the key to development research as well. This, as long as it continues to be funded by the global north, right? But we'll continue to do what we're doing, right? And we'll continue to advocate that. But as long as that is driven by those northern by the northern support, it won't be enough to succeed. It really needs to, the demand for research and the funding for research needs to become part of kind of the development projects and led by the drivers in the global south in those contexts. I want to come back later perhaps to what perhaps PEP can do more about that, but maybe stop at this point. Fred, back to you.
Thanks very much. I'm going to turn back to Anna. You've heard a lot of comments, a lot of very wide-ranging issues from the donors, from the vision that Mustafa has shared. And I wonder if you have any reflections as a researcher, how you'd like to see the donors respond, and how you see the issues that Mustafa has raised from your perspective.
See, Fred, I think PEP is doing a great job. Mm-hmm. And what we are doing now is a movement. I'm sure that if we talk with scholars from the North, they would think it's normal to have all the conferences in northern countries, most of the papers published by northern researchers and editors from northern countries, funding places, centers in northern countries. So what we're doing now is, I think, is starting to show that this is not really correct, or we should change. I'm not going to say it's wrong, but it's time to change. And as Mustafa said, I completely agree. I think with COVID-19 was very clear that if we have this inequality, the whole world will suffer. We see that many diseases are appearing now, and we cannot leave poor countries alone, doing whatever they have to do to solve the problem, because this is not going to happen. And the consequences come for everyone. So climate change is another point. We see a lot going on. Government in countries that are completely crazy people, and the consequences are not only for the country, but the whole world. And so it's time to do something. It's time to change. And I think PEP is in the right track. I think the funders are helping a lot, but unfortunately we're just starting, and it's a difficult time that we need financing, we need networking, we need collaboration, we need funders contacting the universities in other countries, contacting the Institute for collecting data, and trying to help even more that they are doing now. Thank you.
Thanks. And do you think that the main topics that Mustafa put forward, which is how to increase the standard of living in face of the constraints of the earth, how do we think about getting away from neoliberal economics and combining the market, the state, and society as a whole? And his third point was really around the role and importance of technology. Are these areas where PEP could and should actually begin to focus some of their efforts? And then we can move to some comments on what PEP should be doing from others as well.
Yes, technology is really important because it's completely different than 20 years ago, and 20 years ago is nothing. And it's going to be even worse in the future, worse than saying it's going to change really fast from now on, faster. And we have to do something to include developing countries and scholars. I think PEP is doing a good job, and I understand it could improve if we make people aware of the problem and help university centers. One big problem is brain drain. You know, we have these scarce human resources, very expensive human capital that we lose because they want to have better opportunities and they move to developed countries. How to keep those scarce resources in poor countries, how to improve technology, cables, optic fibers, and computers, so people have the tools to work and have a better research and help policy improvement. How to improve education. I think that's the main point. I'm not talking about the university, I'm talking about basic education. This is key. How can we make people aware in general in poor countries that studying is the most important thing? Studying help health, help nutrition, help technology, help policy, everything. And I think that's the main goal that we need to tackle and ask for help from the funders and from PEP.
Thanks very much, Anna.
Thank you, Fred.
Mustafa, I wanted to come back to you. You've been listening to a lot of comments since you made your opening remarks and put forward some really big challenges. How do you think PEP should begin to move in those directions? What should it actually be doing? concretely to move forward. And then I'll turn back to Chris and Ariane on that point.
That's a tough one, Fred.
That's why I gave it to you.
Yes. I think it's what I'm talking about is not something that can be done overnight. It's really it should be part of a vision. I think this requires PEP. I think we have started to do that some time ago. I don't know where it is at. I think in the vision of PEP, I think something of that nature should be included explicitly and developed explicitly. And once you have that set in your vision, you need how do you want to be in 20 years? What do you want to be in 30 years? Once you do that, I think you can work out the implications now. So, for instance, you can work out the idea that you want to focus on technology or something like that. That's going to be one of the main themes. Or you want to work on climate change, or you want to work on inequality as such. So you want to make one of these major themes as your central theme. It's not anymore trade and or this or agriculture or this or that, but you want to have something broader that is really shaping your overall research agenda. And by doing that, and by defining the scope and the challenge that you face, I think you will be bringing up the best of developing countries, researchers, because when you pose a challenge to them, they will try to meet the challenge. So PEP needs to be putting challenges to the development research community. I think challenging them and putting issues to them and through all kinds of instruments should be one way to do it. And go beyond, if you like, what I mean is go beyond the standard way of, we have a research question and then we look at what is the best techniques and what are the approaches, and then we try to find. I think we should, at least some work should start to be moving into that direction, to more broader issues, to more broader challenges that face. And it will take time. It will take time, but I think that's the way to start pulling this into your agenda. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mustafa. I'll go to Chris and then Ariane, and we can leave some time for questions or comments. I haven't seen any yet in the chat or in the Q&A, but if there are some, please by all means post them. I don't think you can actually speak. Chris.
Yeah, so I think in terms of what PEP should do, I think PEP is doing this already. I'll mention two things. One is that there's definitely a strength in numbers. And I think PEP is a member of several regional networks of organizations within the Global South that are doing similar work. And I think PEP can be a leader in that space. And I think it is a leader in that space. Like we've seen all the experience over the years, 20 years of PEP, and then the work that PEP has done during that time that could benefit other organizations in the Global South. And I think the goal there is to strengthen the entire ecosystem. So can we have multiple organizations that are as good and strong as PEP is? And can PEP use the resources, the expertise, the experiences that they've developed over the 20 years to try and strengthen others so that the pie is larger and there are more strong organizations that are advising governments to do this. I think the second thing that I'll mention is really prioritizing government engagement. I think it was great to see the numbers about keep going back to 54% of, I think 56% of research informing decisions. That's huge. That's a lot. And so I think that's the sweet spot. That's the comparative advantage that PEP and its affiliates have, is they are from these countries. They have connections with the minister, with the permanent secretary in the ministry. I think that's a strength. And so if members continue to prioritize that, they'll essentially occupy space. in a way, you become gatekeepers because you own the relationships. And so anybody that comes in will have to work through you. And you have a lot more bargaining power to say, look, we will define the agenda. We already defined the agenda with the government. And so if you're coming to support us, this is what you're going to support. The funding will follow. So I guess instead of primarily chasing requests for proposals, responding to those, focus on what you're very good at, which is you have strong relationships, you can strengthen those, you know what's happening within countries, and you can begin to formulate questions that others can come in to support. So yeah, I think it's flipping that. Instead of going to look for funding first, focus on the relationships with governments within the region. So those two things. Back to you, Fred.
Thanks. Ariane. And then, sorry, just before you start, I do want to go to Jane briefly on one of the comments from Judith Collum in the chat, because she's asking about what PEP is doing in terms of decolonization, in terms of research methods, but she's also asking if the funding partners recognize that there's a need to decolonize both research and methodologies and documentation. So you may want to touch on that as well.
Did you want me to go first or Jane?
I want you to go to first, and then I'll go to Jane.
Thanks. Yeah, so I think my responses are, I think it's underlining, I had about three things that came to mind. I think all the panelists mentioned one of them. So there's perhaps nothing new. I think the idea of a movement is absolutely important, right? And funding movements, funding is very tricky, right? We're here to support the movement and try to support it through our funding. But the important thing is, of course, the movement. And I won't go into the decolonization question, but that's how that needs to happen, right? That needs to, that's not something that funders can try to support that, but that needs to come from the, I'm not sure what the right expression is, but needs to come from those movements. For me, that's quite clear, and we look how to support that. So the question for PEP then, and this is very much, I think Chris, you made that point, right? I think it's so important to do that with other similar organizations, right? As people work in the same space, there's always kind of a competition for resources, but that movement needs to be jointly, and again, then call on funders to support that, right? And help us find ways to support that in the ways that is needed for those purposes. So the question for PEP with those organizations is really comes back to how can we make that the research that is supported more locally led in the way that I spoke about earlier. It is about development. It's not just about research. It's about development being locally led. So it's part of that broader question. For me, that's not about the themes. All the themes that Abby mentions are the right themes, but it's really how, in a particular context, that same theme is articulated, right? I mean, climate is a very clear example, right? The global funding tends to focus on mitigation. In the global south, local communities need more money for adaptation, so we need to continue to shift that. And in the end, maybe those concepts that are thought of in the north aren't relevant for local communities. The point is, it is so important to articulate that from that specific perspective. So the two specific things I have in mind, and like I said, the others have mentioned this before. One, bolder about the successes. When I was introduced as a friendly critic, I think 90% of that has always been be bolder about the successes there, because we need those, because the work deserves it, first of all, and secondly, we need those stories to promote the case for funding. And there's so much good stuff in there. It's really nicely presented earlier on, and so much progress. And just we're here to help you do more for that. And secondly, in that is to create, you're already, the research, the 50+ cases are already clearly showing that, and the cases that didn't succeed, we're trying it as well, right? Just the fact that they didn't achieve it doesn't mean the research project wasn't successful. It's the orientation of PEP to always, and the way you embed that in your granting system is really cutting edge. Maybe there's ways of pushing that a little bit further by focusing on the creation of that demand, if you like, building on the successes where the PEP research did have PEP funded research had that success is think through. It's like how can we push that a little further? You have great cases, for example, of the young research that were asked back by policymakers for another problem, which I think is like one of the critical successes, right? And build on that to move this towards making the case of, in the end, it's those local policy makers that, or communities, stakeholders that need to drive the questions and engage with the researchers. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Jane, do you have want to say a minute or so on Judith's question?
Yes, thank you. I hope you can hear me.
It's fine.
Okay, today is when I've learned that people can refuse to answer questions, but let me not refuse, let me answer it in this way. You are talking about decolonizing both research methodologies and documentation. Yes, I think Ariane has already partly answered that. I believe that we do recognize this, that it's something we are addressing to the best of our ability, given funding constraints, because everything that we do, and it's not just in Africa, in the whole global South, also depends on resources. So I look at it in the two aspects in terms of methodologies. In PEP, we've developed cutting edge approaches. And the whole purpose of mentorship, the very intensive mentorship, is to ensure that our researchers, even the very low level researchers, we train them on these approaches, and we ensure that they can actually apply the approaches and eventually be able to transfer that knowledge to even other researchers in the generation. So I think in terms of methodologies, that is what I'll talk about. And traditionally, over those almost 20 years, we've focused on 4 approaches. We have one which we've now taken a break, maybe comes lower to the level of the ground level, the community-based monitoring system. We have our micro analysis, non-experimental impact evaluation. We have the impact evaluation group, and then we have micro policy modeling. When we come to documentation, again, I'm not sure that we can think of an institution that is trying to do this as best as we are doing. And I emphasized a lot when I was picking up on the lessons on maybe the milestones that Carol emphasized the milestones. I talked more of the lessons, but really the engagement, the documentation that we do, the videos that are produced by our comms people, the training that we do, or the training of our researchers on communication. Actually, most of the activities that we've had over the last 3 weeks, it was more to train our researchers how they are going to communicate that knowledge to the next level. And then, of course, the dissemination workshops, not just PEP-wide dissemination, but supporting them to disseminate at the local level and also at the international level. I believe that there's first the documentation and then sharing of that information. Judith, I would say that we can take the conversation further because but there are also other people who are looking more directly into these issues within PEP. But yes, we do recognize, but funding is always a constraint as to how much of this we can do. Thank you, Fred. I hope I've responded to the question.
Thank you, Jane, and thank you for the question, Judith. Stephen Yeo had a question. The implication of some of these contributions is that PEP should diversify from capacity building to more active engagement in influencing policy. And is this the direction that PEP should move? And I think certainly the comments and challenges that Mustafa has put forward say absolutely we should move in that direction, and PEP is already making certain moves in that direction already through some of the research that it's focusing on, which is not strictly capacity building, but is actually beginning to use the skills the researchers that PEP is working with. Are there any other comments that panel members would like to make on that?
Yeah, I think I can comment on Stephen's question. I think when we think about capacity, and when I'm speaking for the Hewlett Foundation, we think about capacity for a purpose. So it's not just capacitating people for the sake of capacitating them. It's so they can help governments make better decisions and that ultimately improve lives. And so I think these are steps along the same causal chain, as it were, along the same theory of change, that PEP capacitates researchers. Researchers do excellent research, they engage governments, and that research gets used to improve people's lives. So they're not mutually exclusive at all.
Just one comment, Fred.
Please.
I cannot finish this discussion without making one comment on financing. I think as we look forward in the next 20, 30 years, I think this old model of northern finance and southern users of the researchers users has got to evolve. It cannot continue that way. And we know that there are market failures in terms of funding research as a whole. And financing from the South tends to be difficult. But let me say that as we go forward in the next decade or two, I think the possibilities of financing from the South, from within the South, should become much more important. I think we should look very much for partnerships between North and South in funding research in the South. It cannot be South only. I think it's too early, but maybe in 50 years' time we can do that. But in the next 20 years or 30 years, it has got to be more like a partnership time between Northern financing institutions and Southern, because there is a lot of money out there in the South now these days. It's not like 30 years ago. There's a lot of money out there in the private sector as well as in the government sector in many countries. And there is potential for doing partnerships and mobilizing funding from the South. And I think this should help in moving the direction of the nature of the research and the direction of the research as we move forward. Thank you.
Thanks. Before I turn to the others for the last things you want to say, because we only have about 3 or 4 minutes left, I just wanted to mention that Sarmita Flores posted a comment that there's a challenge that we have to confront in some countries. They're talking about Central and South America, where universities are working in more authoritarian systems, and figuring out the challenges of how to face that is an important point to keep in mind. And Bernard de Calouet makes the point that research capacity is a long process. It takes 20 years working on the same topics with similar methodologies to become an expert. And I think that's something PEP has been doing already for 20 years. So there are already some people who are quite expert in the methodologies within the PEP network, but more is certainly needed on that front. I want to turn to Ariane and then Chris and then Anna for a last word on things you want to make sure get said before we close.
Sure, I can start. Yeah. So I think from a funder's perspective, there's I guess 2 things that we can do. I think a lot of questions have been around funding. I think there's definitely a need for funders like ourselves and IDRC and others to continue to fund work that strengthens the Southern knowledge ecosystem, both at the individual but also the institutional level. And I think Hewlett has historically been an example in supporting field building activities. I think starting with our collaboration with IDRC and others in the Think Tank initiative, which I think did amazing work to strengthen the capacities of participating think tanks. So I think that there's definitely a need to build on that work to strengthen the field, because stronger institutions, stronger individuals mean that the quality of research will be better. Governments will be informed with good evidence, and those decisions will be better, and that will be better for everybody for development. Now, I understand that capacity building is not attractive to a lot of funders compared to buying quick results, quick wins. But if we're going to sustainably shift power in global knowledge production, I think we must be willing to make the investments that will address the underlying systemic issues that limit participation by Southern researchers in development. The second thing that I'll mention, which I think funders can do, is to advocate for a shift in funding practices. Now, I think Fred, you mentioned Hill is probably the exception in that regard, in how flexible we are. But I think there are so many capable knowledge organizations in the global South for funders to pick and support. It all boils down to trust. We must be willing to trust Southern knowledge organizations, or else we'll keep directing our funding to the same Northern organizations that have traditionally received funding, and therefore will continue to further advance and expand the inequities in global knowledge production. So I wanted to mention those two things.
Thanks, Chris. Ariane.
Thanks very much. Not really a lot to add. You know, as a funder, looking at the trends at ODA at this point of time, as Chris rightly said, and in those times of crisis, capacity building is even less popular than before. We need the strongest possible arguments for doing what we're doing, right? So I do want to underline the point about being bolder about successes, and the point about the movement, right? And including on decolonization, right? These needs to, it's going to sound a little bit odd, but we need to be educated what it needs to look like. That we are a crown corporation that has existed for 50 years, right? We're a crown corporation, existed for 50 years. I think we've evolved, but the institutions are still there. So we need to work together to continuously change those practices. But I don't want to end on a pessimistic note, right? That's the work we have to do. I just want to go back to, you know, this has been 20 years of phenomenal work. I'm so happy to see that, you know, the people that started this in this meeting, that continued commitment, this beautiful testimonies about how did support help people, you know, change their career, if not more, and that's all through your hard work, and I just want to celebrate that and say, you know, we're here for the next 20 years. Thanks very much, Fred.
Thanks very much, Anna. I'll go to you for the last word, and coming back to your movement.
Yes, yeah, that's a very good, important movement we are here doing now. And
Right.
I think one point is technology. For technology improvement, we need more private sector involvement. Probably the funders get government and private sector, because this is huge and we need improvements. Climate change, we also, I know PEP has a very, as Chris mentioned, very nice way of influencing policy and in contact with government, but that's a very crucial point in improving climate change and help the world. I think a very direct link that exists a little bit today, but it's not direct. It's like to have PEP and the funders connected directly to a university to, for example, promote events, invite students to have participating conferences or visiting a center and taking classes and doing research and so on. I think this would be important. Say, I don't know, the best student would get a scholarship every year, something like that. And that's it. I think data collection as well. We have very good institutes. Sometimes they don't have money for collecting data. And as they mentioned, we in South America and Central America, we are in trouble with our government now. And so it's a difficult time that need help. Thank you so much.
Thanks very much, Anna. I'm not going to try to summarize. This is an ongoing conversation. It's an open conversation. So if any of you in the audience or in the panel have other comments or reactions, PEP would welcome receiving those. I'm sure we're going to have to listen to this more than once to think through the suggestions, implications, and possibilities. So what I'd like to do now is just thank the panelists very, very much for some very thoughtful and thought-provoking comments and suggestions for PEP. So thank you very much. And I'll turn back to, I guess, to Marjorie.
Thank you. Thank you very much. That was the last session of our event. So I really appreciate everybody's comments, insights. That was a very interesting discussion. So I want to thank all participants as well for being with us today. And we hope you enjoyed the event, and we hope you continue to follow us and participate in our coming events. There will be more of these discussions happening throughout the year. So thank you very much. Maybe Jane, you want to say a few words?
No, also just to thank everyone for attending. We are very proud to be celebrating 20 years. And as we indicated earlier, we'll be producing a series of documentation, the same documentation Judith asked about, as we celebrate over the next 3 months up to October, when we actually clock 20 years. But just to say that we appreciate all of you. You've been a part of this journey with us, and look forward to working with you the next 20 years together in different capacities. Thank you. And of course, we'll be publishing the proceedings of this symposium. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, technical team. Bye-bye,
Yes,
everyone. Have a nice weekend.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, the interpreters as well. Very good job. Thank you.